Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Beautiful Struggle. I am Ajiman Jasante Goodman.
Ray Goodman here.
TJ Goodman here.
And like I said before, I am Aji Goodman. This is The Beautiful Struggle. Before we get into what the topic is today, which is the education gap, I'd like to tell you what Black Advancement Incorporated is. Black Advancement Incorporated is a nonprofit organization that seeks to create unity within the Black community through action and dialogue, this being the dialogue portion. Now, today we will be discussing with our panel the educational gap and why it exists. And to kick us off, we will start with TJ. TJ, what you got for us?
All right, gentlemen. So I did a decent amount of reading on this, and I kind of rat holed myself in some areas. And let me explain what I mean, right? So when I was trying to figure out where this started, my first thought was, okay, when did school actually become formalized in this country? Because in the beginning, the education was probably just from your parents or whatever, and a lot of things were more trade oriented and agricultural and things like that, right? So I started down that road, and I think schools started getting formalized maybe somewhere in the 1800s. I forget the gentleman's name that learned something over when he was studying in Prussia, or he took examples from Prussian schools on how to organize curriculum, and he wanted that to be cascaded across the country, and eventually that's what happened. That's why we have the kind of school system we have today. But all throughout the history of this country, you see when there are schools, there are some Black schools, right? The teachers of those schools weren't always Blacks. Sometimes they were white, even way back in the day. And since there were schools, I started to try to figure out, okay, so if there were schools, then what's the gap all about? Not just education, but achievement. I think those two things are very much linked together. So some of the things that I ran into, regardless of time period in history, low expectations, right? Everyone on this panel has children. You've seen how brilliant kids are. They learn so fast, right? And somehow just about every kid that I've ever seen always meets expectation. Doesn't matter what hue they are, what their background is. If there are high expectations placed on that child, they will figure out a way to meet those expectations. Likewise with low, right? I had read it at one point that the teachers back in the day, they had convinced minority students that they were inferior. So they had an inferiority complex. So they felt like they weren't supposed to do as well as the other students. So that impacted them. So you've got, teacher influence, you've got the parent angle, you've got all that. But most of what I saw, all roads seem to lead back to funding, issues with funding. And that is a poverty thing, right? And unfortunately, a lot of times impoverished areas are comprised of minority people. There's some, of course, poor whites as well, but most minorities are kind of grouped in those areas. I mean, even the way that money is distributed through the tax system apparently has to do with how affordable the housing is. So the more affordable the housing is, the less funding is awarded to those areas. So if you happen to live by an area that has a lot of people that are in, I don't want to say financial destitution or anything, but even if it's just affordable housing, you have just put yourself at a disadvantage. So the amount of spending per child goes down. If you put the numbers side by side nowadays, they don't look technically that wide, maybe a few $1,000s, but if you spread that across this country, we're talking about $23 billion less or something like that. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, so if you have something that is underfunded, what does that do to those that are within that system? So an underfunded system, of course, the results are things like lower teacher salaries, right? Which means your ability to attract the more experienced, and I don't want to necessarily say quality, I'll say experienced teachers number one, experienced teachers aren't going to go somewhere to make less money. That's just not happening. Right. So if you do get teachers, maybe they're young and fired up and they're willing to do the low salary thing in the beginning, but then you put yourself in a situation you've got high turnover. Right. So that also works against the kids. And being in lower socioeconomic living situations, those schools also end up having way more students in the classroom. So one of the stats that I had seen was that the best student outcomes when there's about like 18 students in the class. If you're an underfunded school, you may have as many as like 48 kids in that class. Right. So you've got all this big, huge mix of just issue after issue after issue, but all of it seems to kind of fan back to the money piece. I mean, I even saw where people were getting like tax cuts for families that send their kids to private school. That also takes away from the funding for public school. So the data basically shows that poverty is the main reason, right? But if you're an impoverished white neighborhood, you do get more funding than an impoverished majority minority area. Lack of programs, and this was something that I didn't really quite understand initially until I started scratching a little bit more. I was like, what programs? What are they talking about? So in areas that where people tend to be in poverty, the kids have a lot more stresses than people that aren't. So that creates sometimes mental health problems, issues with being able to know where your next meal is coming from. I mean, all these things, right? So these places, they need programs in order to help the kids deal with this stuff. And these are the places that are being underfunded. So when you mix all this together, you end up with students not able to get the kind of education that they need. And I'm going to give one, forgive me, Greg, for being long-winded, but I'm going to give an example here. So you guys, I know at least one of you was with me when we went to the Black-owned bank in a city not too far from where we are now, right? Now, customer service, all that stuff was on par with any other bank that you would go to. But what was inside? They were dealing literally with paper, right? They were dealing with paper and dot matrix printers and things that were, I mean, it was like throwback from Y2K or something like that. So as an example of something that is underfunded, imagine if you are a bank employee and that's the system that you come up in. You'll understand what a bank's purpose is and some things about banking, generally speaking. But you're going to have a hard time competing with somebody who comes up in a bank where, they've got one bank's dealing with paper and the other one has an app where you don't even have to go to the bank to do actual banking. That's a huge, huge gap, a huge divide. And that's the kind of divide that's happening in underfunded schools. So as history progresses, as we move on, as technology gets more and more, I'll say, fast and complex, kids get left further and further behind because, the funding is not there. So all of that just to say, I think the main reason is about money from what I saw. Greg, what do you think?
I think you're 100% right. You tackled all of the financial areas, and that is a huge chunk of it. So since you tackled it from that direction, I'll tell you some of the things that my research is also took me to outside of the financial. But it's going to start with the financial, but it'll get to other things. Okay, first off, within these schools, broken down finances and everything else, the education is going to suffer it'll suffer to a degree. Like you said, you can still be an extremely brilliant person even with the finances down, which was proven throughout the schools in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They brought forth some of the most brilliant Black minds, during this time. What ended up happening to further the gap that we were trying to close in an attempt to close this gap we asked for integration. Now, during this integration period, it could have been really positive. Instead of asking for integration, what we should have asked for was equal amounts of money. Because for the integration process, what ended up happening to a lot of Black students is they were bused to white schools where people did not want them. So there's a stress there. And they lost the love and care of their teachers, because it's not like they took the Black teachers with them to come to these new schools. So that plays into the lower expectation that these white teachers have for them. It also adds to the point where the white teachers don't care about them and see them as less than all the other students. And if you did happen to thrive and get ahead in that system, it was way more pressure than the average white students, because you're not just there representing TJ or just representing Aji, you're representing all Blacks. When you are the only Black face in that advanced course, that is a difficult thing to do. You know what I'm saying? And it's not like you have a whole lot of Black role models that you can look up to and see, not only in those schools, but in many cases in your personal home life, as far as education goes back then. I mean, it's a little bit different now, but back then, there weren't doctors and lawyers and everything else just right up the street. And then when you are compared to other Black people, it's always the best of the best. You know what I'm saying? You're like, the only thing is you can do it. Obama became president. Really, that's the only mark I got, Obama? Like, someone who's done something impossible almost? That's the mark you're putting me under? I'm supposed to live up to that? I'm supposed to live up to the one thing, the one most impossible thing that someone's done? Come on, man. There's a better chance of getting to the moon than becoming another Obama. Okay, there's a better chance of you building your own rocket. But anyway, but that is also part of the social construct, which makes school very difficult. Because even with less, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, kids thrive more because the teachers were invested in those students. Once Black students were bused into these white schools, although they had better facilities, better books, better materials to work with, and all these things, there was a different element that was riding on them, and that was basically just the stress of being Black, just the stress of being Black in a white environment, especially back then when there was so much. There were so few of you scattered in there. They take like 12 Black kids and throw them in a school of hundreds with white people that didn't want them there. And that includes the staff. It's not just the students, it's the staff. It's not just the staff, it's also the students' parents. Okay, it's a lot of stress, and it's hard. You have to be beyond great to thrive in that situation. Not only to just graduate, but most of these kids that were in these situations could make it and had to be at the top of their class in order to make it. That was the only way. I'm sure that they were graded more harshly than the average student. So there's added stress on in the beginnings of this. Now, once it started really intermingling, at that point, you still had all the same problems, but we're getting more into the crack era at this point. So once you get into the crack era and the schools are more intermingled, it's still, and now we have a bunch of social problems. No jobs in the communities. They've taken out all the jobs in the community, and then they've supplanted drugs in your community. And a lot of these times when you supplant drugs and they have no jobs, you have a bunch of fathers that are still trying to find a way. So they end up in the drug game or drug users just from stress, which leaves the family broken. And you're taking a broken kid and put him into a system that is uncomfortable for him when you're busing them to these other schools. Or you keep them in the same schools in the inner city where there's absolutely no funding because it's all paid off of the taxes. So there's no money going into the school either way. So either way, it's all a loss in that era. And once again, there are kids that made it through and graduated and everything, but in order to be one of those kids, one of the cream of the crop kids, the level of strong will that you had to have as a Black student in comparison to your counterparts is above and beyond, just above and beyond. So the ones that did make it were extremely exceptional. They had to be. There's no other way around it. A prime example, although he is turned crazy over the past years. A guy like Ben Carson had to be extremely intelligent to make it through the situations that he was in. You know what I'm saying? Unless you were playing sports and killing it, just to be a regular student in the books, you had to be an amazing student in order to make it. Because I don't think at that time you weren't getting the extra care that other students were getting. You weren't getting the extra attention placed on you like the other students. You weren't getting suggestions or help from the guidance counselors. You need to go to this college and that college and everything else. Unless you had a Black teacher in there normally that would be looking out for you. Now, I'm not saying that it was every white teacher, but a majority of them really didn't care about you. That wasn't their focus. So mostly you was on your own. And in a lot of these cases, like I said, with the crack epidemic and all this stuff going on, if you don't got your mom's probably working 2 jobs, your dad may be locked up, and for you to make it, it's just a whole lot of environmental turmoil that you're carrying on your back to go to school. So in that aspect, the emotional aspect of it it's far more difficult to be successful under those circumstances, especially as a child, because you don't know how to control all your emotions yet. You know what I'm saying? This is all going on while biologically your body is going through puberty and changes. So there's rage and ups and downs mentally that you're going through, and it's hard to that makes it difficult enough to focus alone. And then add on all the rest of this stuff, and add on the fact that you have teachers that don't care if you succeed or fail. In fact, they'd rather see you fail. They get nervous if you get in more trouble than the average white student just based on your color. So all of these things play into it, along with the financial part of the game.
All right. That was good stuff from both of our panelists. Let's go ahead and move into the full group discussion in terms of some of the things that you think are the reasons why the education gap continues, the educational achievement gap, I should say, continues to, or not continues, but existed back then. Why it existed in the first place, I should say.
You said, wow, it's still
why it exists now. Yeah.
Why it exists now.
So one of the things, and I'm not a part of this discussion, but I'll throw it out for you guys just to chew on for your discussion, was how much this plays into the other discussion that we had, which was, why does the wealth gap exist? And how do you feel like those things kind of tie together?
Yeah, I think part of what I was hoping to communicate is
those things. You alluded to it really well.
Yeah, they can't be separated, and trying to think of some kind of analogy to make it simple. I wish I knew more about horticulture. So like, for example, like if you're, let's say you've got some kind of a garden, right? I'm just making this up. And water is a precious resource, right? It's almost like, okay, well, I'm gonna water my favorite stuff, make sure that it gets water, and everything else, if it rains, then cool. If not, I give you a little bit of water here and there, but you're just not precious to me, right? And it kind of feels like that decision is being made at I guess various levels. This whole funding thing it's not just one level, right? So somewhere, and maybe it's just the byproduct of being in a capitalist society, the decision is made. I guess it's always been made that there will be haves and have-nots. That's just the way that things go. It has to be that way. It's just unfortunate that is also placed on something as important as children's education. And what I was trying to explain before, as time goes on, as things become more complicated. Greg made a great point about those incredibly accomplished Black people from 50s, 60s era, 40s, 50s, 60s era. But to put it in a little more modern perspective, that was, the pencil and paper era. Nowadays, kids, I mean, there are pencil and paper, of course, but they're taking laptops to class, and they need internet access in order to do things. I mean, it's so easy to be left behind now. There's not even textbooks. Like my kids don't even really have textbooks. Not really.
Yeah.
So having an old textbook. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I'm glad that you brought up this point, because I was going to try to throw out the question so Greg feels comfortable like chiming in on this part, where I was going to be like, do you think funding is really the biggest deal as far as the educational gap, the educational achievement gap, I should say, being there? Do you think that funding is the prime reason, or do you think it's just one of the reasons?
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking to everybody, but yeah, I was gonna.
Oh yeah, finances definitely. That is definitely the biggest reason for all these things. Without the money behind anything, it's gonna fail at some point, or on some level, it's gonna fail. You know what I'm saying? If there's not money pumped into the system in order to keep you on par with the rest of the world, then it's gonna be difficult. I mean, it's almost like trying to go to war with baseball bats and swords in this era. Sure, you're going to get a few. There's a few people that'll make it, but most people don't end up dying because everybody else got guns. It's the same thing with finances. If everybody else has got money to fund their business and their education and everything else, then of course they're going to win. Now there's always that a handful of special people that can make it through all that stuff, but not everybody's special. I'm talking about for the average Joe, that there has to be a little bit more. And the reason why, and here's another thing that I say, I didn't research this on anything. This is just my personal opinion. This is how I know that finances are some of the most important things and issues, not only through the world, but also in the education system, is because they don't teach finances in school. You know what I'm saying? Stuff you learn at home.
Not
okay.
Not
if they were teaching that in school, then we could figure out things while we're young, and then that could help you grow later on. Most Black people don't find out about finances and how finance and money truly works until they're damn near 30 or 40. That's when we start to catch on, because it's not taught in school, and it's not something that you can learn at home in most cases, because your parents don't know jack about finances either with a lot of people. But when you come from a background where there's already money, you learn these lessons young, so you can thrive and continue on. But seeing that it's one of the most important things in what is a capitalistic society, I feel like it should be taught in school, but they'll never teach you that in school.
It's a very good point.
And that's how I know that finances mean a lot, and that's how I know that they are the most pivotal problem within the school system. Because if they taught you about the financial problem in the school system, the smart kids that are in these broke schools could figure it out, and they would, the ones that actually care, they would actually write letters and do things to try and get more money in here. They would have a voice on this topic because they have a thirst for knowledge, but they're not going to teach them that. Which is why it's important that we get our own schools at some point.
So to extend your point on that, maybe tangentially, you had talked about, we all know that it's not impossible to make it through the public school system without getting a good education. It can be done even in a school that's underfunded. But I think the issue that you also run into is somebody taking a chance on you, right? If you're from one of these schools, even if you've done really well, there is an understanding from higher education, even from, I guess, employment, that where you came from is at a certain percentile of the national school, I guess I'll call it average. So getting somebody to take a chance on you is also, it's not hopeless, but it makes things more difficult. If you come from a magnet school or something like that, in a private school that's well renowned, even if you're not a great student, you still probably stand a better chance than somebody that did a really good job in PS 109. I'm just not picking on your PS 109. It's just the first number that came in my head. if you come from there, right?
Yep. It's like being the community college athlete of the year. You're great. You're great in community college, but are you going to go to Ohio State and be that guy? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Is
You're
Ohio
great.
State, you try out?
Yeah. Nobody's not going to say you're not great, but there's levels to this.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like that.
Well, speaking of these levels and all the things that everyone's been bringing up, and Greg had alluded to something that I don't know, it's possibly could be one of his solutions, but we'll move to the solution section. This is pretty much why the program exists, so that we can try to come up with different ideas to try to combat the problems, which is also why Black Advancement Incorporated exists as well. So if you don't have a solution today, that's fine. You can just say pass. But if you do have a suggestion, let us know. For solutions, suggestions, we'll start with TJ like we've been doing. TJ, do you have any solutions?
This is a tough one. This is a tough one, especially considering that I think we're all, if we're not in agreement that funding is number one, we're in agreement that funding is pretty close to the top of the list of issues when it comes to achieving educational gaps. So it seems that funding is not even loosely. I think it's pretty tightly coupled to district lines, right? Because we talked about the housing piece. So maybe a potential solution would be some kind of program where, because I mean, you can't redraw the district lines and then, think that it's all done, because, let me see, parents that want their kids to be around the best or whatever are nomadic in nature. I'll just say that. So if you redraw the lines for their child to be included in something they don't want them included in, if they have enough means, they'll just move to the next one. So some kind of rotational district drawing. I'm not sure how that could be accomplished, if that's through making sure that somebody within the local government is fired up about education and making sure that all kids receive a great education. So something that has to do with the redrawing of the district line, so that money is distributed better. The only other that as one solution, and the other one that comes to mind is something that we've seen a couple of examples of, and I'll throw out these huge names, Jalen Rose and LeBron James. These guys started their own schools in areas that were underfunded, right? They get their funding through a different method, and that's what helps their students to have the things that they need in the programs that need to be available for that school. So more of that kind of thing would be another solution. I know that's extremely difficult. I heard Jalen going through the litany of things that he had to go through. He didn't go through everything, of course, because there wasn't enough time, but things that you would never think of. They're time consuming, expensive,
Yeah.
So it was, shout out to those guys, but that would be another solution. That's all I got for you right now, unfortunately.
Hey, there's always time with these evergreen topics. Greg, do you have any solutions for this one?
TJ nailed it. There's only two real solutions, and there's a third possible one, but that will take a lot longer. The first one is you got to take the tax money and spread it out evenly amongst the whole district or the whole county or the whole city, wherever you're at. You have to take that tax money and distribute it equally amongst the schools, so there'll at least be some kind of balance that can happen, and then you can truly figure out who's who and what's what. I mean, there's no reason for a kid's education to suffer just because he lives in a poor neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of brilliant minds in these poor neighborhoods. And if you don't believe me, just look at all every Black billionaire in this country. I don't think none of them have college degrees, barely. So there's brilliant minds in these hard places. You know what I'm saying? So there's plenty of smart. There's just not plenty of education. So if you distribute that throughout all these schools, and make it a little more even, that could be, you know, something that could definitely help. At least as in theory, it would definitely help. Another solution is like TJ said, Black private schools. We need to either, as a community, put all our money together to build a school, to fund schools for these people in these lacking neighborhoods. You can either find some kind of rich Black philanthropist, or we can, as a community, all put in to these schools and try and build it up ourselves and send our children there. There's that solution. Another one is something that people are in the right wing are definitely opposed to. You could actually 100%. It's not in schools now, but apparently they think it's a school. Implement a CRT program within the school and teach these kids the reason why these things are happening, with the hopes of some of these kids, because kids are, for the most part, kids don't understand or identify with race or anything like that till they get a little bit older and start to understand. But if you catch them while they're young and they see that these things, the unfair treatment of certain groups in this country, that will get in their heart. And when they get older and they become the decision makers, they can make some of these changes. Like I said, that's the long con. But we know that will probably never happen. More than likely, it won't happen. They won't allow it to happen. And I mean, the final solution is we could definitely get more programs to go into these schools and try to motivate these young Black students and make them understand that being smart is also cool, because most people, like that's not the thing in school, and I don't know if it's ever been the thing in school. Like, girls don't like smart dudes. They like they like trifling dudes. You know what I'm saying? But, and that's not to put this on the young ladies. Hey, they're just looking for a little excitement, whatever. But what we have to do is have grown Black men that are mature, who have success in life and have an understanding of what life is once you get to a certain age. You know what I'm saying? And they recognize that it starts here. So we need to have more programs with more Black role models talking to these kids and making them understand you can still be you, you can still talk, you know, your slang and all that stuff, but education is how you get to this point where I'm at. And if you want to be here, this is where it starts. So there needs to be a check-in system and a motivation system to ensure that these kids are staying on the right track. And it has to be people that actually have time to do this and actually care. People that'll check in, you know, people that'll make sure you're actually getting your lunch at school or having your breakfast programs and stuff. Those kind of people that care and will put you not so much in check, but will ensure that you are focused on what the task is, and help you and steer you in the right direction. Because a lot of these kids don't have any direction. So even the ones that are smart either don't realize they're smart or don't want to be smart, because they know what smart is not what they're programmed to be based on everything that they see. And the shame of it is, little do they know, all these people that they look up to, you know, that they see in the movies, the rappers and all this other stuff, all of these dudes are very smart, extremely smart, but they don't know that. You know what I'm saying? They don't realize that a guy like Jay-Z is brilliant. They just see all the glamour and glitz, and they think it's all, oh, he just made a couple of songs and all of a sudden, poof, billions. It's not how it works. There's all kinds of backdoors and everything else that Jay-Z has learned and knows in order to get to $1 billion. LeBron James, same thing. He didn't get $1 billion just from playing basketball. There's a million other things behind all that that he's done outside of basketball. They start with this. So we need people to find these kids, find out what they're interested in, key in on that, and show them how to get there. And just educate them and keep them on a right track. And that doesn't mean you got to be a Poindexter. You can still be cool, but there's also this that has to be done, because I understand that cool still means a whole lot to kids. Nobody wants harassment. Okay, you can still be cool and smart. We got to find people that can do that.
The throwback Poindexter reference. Wow, what a musical. Anyway, that's our show. That's all for us today from The Beautiful Struggle. Thank you for watching. You can see this and more at Black Advancement's YouTube channel, or you can go to our website, which is www.blackadvancement.com. Until the next time, peace and advance.